Well, I was a player. I was a guitar player and a bass player. Had a band. Used to play at parties. It's funny, we spent a lot of summers in Hawaii, and so I played at cocktail parties, things, dance parties, things like that. But also, I was into classical music. I was into jazz. I was into everything, and so um, and I was also just I was kind of an audio enthusiast from the time I was maybe 13, 12. I was just totally into music and sound, and I think it all one thing led to another. But I guess the original thing was when I was creating speaker systems at a very early age. It was the question of great sounding material to play. And it's still a problem is there's just a handful of recordings that sound ridiculously great. And so I said, well, I know exactly what I want to hear. Why don't I make my own recordings? So I started doing live performances, recording live shows, recording drums and bass and various things with equipment that I'd come up with. And I found that I can make recordings that sounded significantly more impressive than most of the things I could buy. And so eventually I opened my first studio, and the premise of that was I wanted to make this material to play on my loudspeakers. And so what happened is people became very interested in the material I was recording, and I ended up becoming a recording engineer and a producer. I didn't intend to. I intended to design and build speaker systems, and really, it was just a means for me to get impressive sounding material to play on my speakers. And I was also recording. I got record symphonies and pipe organs and big bands and rock bands and everything. And it was a lot. It was a great time. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it wasn't what I necessarily meant to do. Well, I have fun. I think it's to me. It's just I'm in the studio all the time. I was in the studio yesterday. I still love making records. I love especially with great musicians. It makes life. It's one of the fun things to do. Well, it was lots of fun. I mean, I was a fan of Roy Halley, of course, who was doing. I think he did Blood, Sweat, and Tears records. He did, Simon and Garfunkel records. I mean, I think it was what was that first record that they did? Bookends. And I couldn't have been. I don't know how old I was. I don't know, I was 14 or 15. And I heard this record, and I was just kind of knocked out with the production and the sound for what that was. And Roy, I know now Roy, very well. And then when they did the first Blood, Sweat, and Tears record, I went like, or the second one actually that had spinning wheel stuff. It was pretty unique. I mean, believe it or not, that was like kind of a big example of stereo drums. And Bobby Colomby, who's a drummer, is a great friend of mine, said, when they were recording that stuff, it was really it was very different than what had come before it. Or even like going back to like Jazz Crusaders, my friend Rick Piccone, who recorded those records. It's one of those where Larry Carlton's playing on it. It's a song So Far Away, that she wrote out. I think right now, but it was they did a version with Wilton Filter and Larry Carlton. It sounds insane, and my friend Rick Piccone recorded it, and so those are some of the influences. And then of course I was a huge Phil Ramone. I was a huge fan of Phil Ramone, and then Phil Ramone we became great friends later on. But he was doing the Dionne Warwick stuff live to 2-track, just straight 2-track, and like even if like in the Austin Powers movie, there's that song da 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 boom, that big thing. Phil Ramone recorded that with Quincy Jones live 2-track, and it still sounds killer. And so those were my sort of people that influenced me on a sonic level. And then I mean, I remember being in Vegas, and that's my parents, and Oscar Peterson Trio was playing with Ray Brown in like a lounge thing, right? And I remember walking up to Oscar Peterson, listening to what it sounded like, and listening to Ray Brown's bass. I'm like, this is nuts. It sounds. Oh, I was maybe 11, you know. And then my mom was very involved with the LA Phil, so I would go down for rehearsals, and I would sit right, I'd sit in the orchestra, I'd walk around, I'd sit right behind the conductor. And of course, I prefer sitting where the conductor's sitting, than sitting out in the audience because I love I like that sound. And so I listened to all sorts of music. And then as a player, I played jazz, I played pop, I played, rock and roll, all different things. But so I like all kinds of music, anything that emotionally moves you, I guess I would say. Well, it's funny. My first studio was actually in the basement of an amusement park called Pacific Ocean Park in Venice, which is now all gone. And so I ran a studio in 11th and 12th grade, full commercial studio in the basement of this building. There was upstairs was this beer bar called the Beach House, and the guy who owned it wanted a PA. And I said, well, look, I'll put a PA in for you. if you'll give me they had like an old speakeasy style nightclub from the 30s, and it was like 5,000 square feet. He didn't need it, so I got that. I traded him the system, and he let me have that space for free. And that's where, and I would talk to bands that coming down and doing their recordings in my studio. They were doing, and that was my first studio. And then in 1972, I built Ocean Way, my first garage studio, but it was almost like a 4-car garage with beam ceilings. It was a really nice garage, and we built the first studio, my first full-on commercial studio with really great equipment. And that was 1970, 72, 73, around that period of time. And it was on a street called Ocean Way. Also, there's a buddy of mine, Ry Cooter, who's a guitar player who lived just like 3 blocks away. A lot of musicians in that area, that was hanging out. And we probably did 50 albums out of the garage. It was a very busy garage. The problem there was I did a lot of R&B acts, a lot of jazz acts. And we worked pretty late at night, and you're in a residential community. And so people come out of the studio at midnight, and it's a little bit loud occasionally. And the neighbors finally said, we think this is not a good idea. And that's when my good friend Bill Putnam, who had United Western Studios, said, Alan, I got this room. It's in the back. It's the B room. And he'd been leasing it out to a company called TVR. He said, would you be interested? And I says, yes, I would. Because, of course, at that point in time, studios were getting small and dead. Big live rooms were out. And so when Geordie Hormel built Village, those rooms were like, the big room was probably this size. And so when you get into a room like Studio B, where there's just all this air and space around the instrument, just even doing acoustic guitar with a couple of mics, you just hear this size and space around it. I love that. So as long as that's controlled, the low frequency ambience is controlled, you can make that sound stunning with Isoboost. And so I kind of re-brought in the old school of what big rooms were all about. So I took over Studio B there. It was very successful. And the other thing I did is kind of interesting was that in that first studio, I had never signed a lease really, and I said, you mean you sign a lease here and you're on the hook for 3 years at this amount of money? I said, gee, that's kind of crazy, Bill. He says, no, I'll make you a sweetheart deal. So he says, here's the base rent, and it was not that much, just $2,500 a month or something back then. And I'll do this override. And what this means is once you hit a certain gross number, then I'll take a percentage of that beyond. And that seemed fine to me. Well, of course, we went in there and we got really, really successful. And I think I was ending up paying like $12,000 or $13,000 a month in rent, even the basis. But I was making a lot of money, and what the hell, Bill was happy, I was happy. So then that lasted not too much longer before I took over the A room. So then I had both rooms, and then I had another mixed room as well as that, all in that same building. And then we eventually added the third room. And then as time progressed, Bill Putnam Sr. he had a third triple bypass, unfortunately, because Bill was having some heart issues, and he ended up selling the company to Harman, which owns, of course, JBL and Lexicon. And so I ended up taking over Studio 2 in the 6,000 Sons building, which is now East West. And then I took over Studio 3, then I took over Studio 1, then I built 2 more studios. And so we actually had the 6,000 and 6050 buildings, so we had about 40,000 square feet on Sunset, and that was the beginning of Ocean Way. And then it was big front, a lot of rooms. And then we ended up, because there's one other thing we did that kind of made this work, and that is that Bill Putnam Sr. and I started making deals together. Well, I ended up buying a bunch of equipment from Bill, and the original Studio 1 console that was in the 6,000 building is the first console I put in my garage. And I ended up buying all that stuff from Bill. But then later on, Bill and I said, Bill, I'm seeing some potential here to make some deals here. If you want to fund it, I'll go out and make these deals. And so I bought out studio after studio after studio. Bill funded it. I bought it out. We split the profit. But as I did this, I started collecting lots and lots of Pultecs and Langs and Fairchilds and tube mics and stuff, and it just started stacking up. So I was able to get this pretty astonishing equipment list of all the things that I liked at incredibly reasonable prices. I mean, really, basically for free, if you want to look at it that way. And so we built up an inventory of aux gear that was almost unrivaled. And about that same time, there was a friend of mine named Dan Alexander, who was kind of a guitar wheeler dealer, sharp guy. And he says, Alan, I think if you send me to Europe, I can clean house. All the broadcast companies were just throwing this stuff out, and they were in churches, they were all over the place. So I said, that sounds like a good deal. So I funded the venture. He went to Europe. We bought about 1,000 mics, maybe more than that, actually, maybe 1,500 from Europe over a period. And I bought M50s, M49s, C12s, C24s, 251s, I mean, big quantities. And so, part of the thing about Ocean Way, apart from having outrageous speakers, was having a mic collection that was nuts and an aux gear that was nuts. And there wasn't really anyone that could compete with us on that level at that time. And so it was just a unique group of circumstances that let me do that. Because the other thing for me too was the total fun for me, and this was even true in the garage, is if I did a tracking date, and the speakers I had in my garage it's a Triamped straight horn system that was about 7 feet high. It had double drivers and a high frequency horn, direct rating tweeter that was a aluminum dome with a big magnetic structure, and then twin 15s on each side, amplified. It sounded nuts. I mean, I don't think anyone ever heard anything quite like that in a studio. Most people were still using 604Es, as a speaker. And when you walk in and hear this, it's like, I remember, Harvey Mason and various people, they'd walk in for the playback and they would just be glued. They'd sit at the console and just like, they get excited because it sounded, and that was the joy for me. The playback, when they would come over the playbacks, or I'm doing something with, Steve Ferroni and Nathan East or Vinny Kelly, they come in, it was like, yeah. And that's what I live for that. That's my joy, is to make them go say, that's ridiculous. And if they say that, then I've had a day. It's my day. That's my joy, is making the musicians think this. And then I was always into making the headphone mixes sound like a finished record, that the reverbs, the delays, everything sounded. So when I would set up for a tracking date, once I set my levels, the first thing I would do is put on headphones and get the cue mixes sounding great. Because as players, if they love what they're hearing, they're going to play great. They feel it, and they said they got so spoiled because usually put it in like it's a mess and this isn't right. And it's just not. It needs to sound polished and slick. And the other thing, like when we built Record One, which is the next complex, and Bruce Woodine and Quincy kind of came in and was basically we had done some work on Thriller at Ocean Way, and then Bruce and Quincy loved the studio, and I said, well, I've got a new complex called Record One that I bought, basically from Mel Simon in the Dog Razor studio, and I said, I'm building this really custom room with the largest discrete Neve ever built in the world. That time was 80 plus 32 inputs. It's about 16 feet long, and so they came over there. They started working in the API room. They loved it, and then basically Quincy, Bruce, and Michael Jackson lived there for in perpetuity. And so I built some pretty crazy speakers for Michael Jackson to listen to, and he loved that, and Bruce loved it. And Bruce Woodine is, one of the greatest engineers I think ever to walk the planet. And there were times when Bruce would work on a project, and I would sit there, and I'd come, he says, "Come on, listen to this," and I would sit next to Bruce, and he'd play me something, and when it's just insane, it's that good. And of course, there's always a thing where sometimes the rough mixes are just so stellar, you just wish that was saved because it's just a moment in time where everything is perfect. And he played me stuff that I still have chills thinking about how good it was. And also because Bruce was so good, I mean, young guys, particularly in the R&B community, who listen to stuff, it's so slick, it's so polished, it sounds so amazing. It's sort of a reference into what's possible on a musical level. And I had dinner with Bruce maybe 4 months ago, and in Ocala, Florida, where he lives. And Bruce is 88 and still very together. And he had a minor stroke, but he came back from it. And I'd say he's pretty on it right now, and so it makes me feel great that Bruce is still. And I built a custom system for Bruce, a 3-channel system that he has at his house, in Florida. Oh.
Ocean Ways, I think it's an experience, and when I play it for people that aren't necessarily involved in audio,
Right.
and they listen to it, even they point out things in that album. They're like, I never heard that snap,
Right.
or that, and the detail that these show, and just the mix of that album alone.
I mean, it's just a phenomenal piece of work. I mean, it's just masterful. And there's lots of great projects Bruce did. Well, Bruce, he started working for Bill Putnam at University of Chicago. So my mentor, Bill Putnam, was also his mentor. It's just so funny how that circles around. And then it's funny because Eddie Cherney, who is a close friend and a great client of ours, who did Nick of Time and all these records in my studios, but Don was, he was Bruce Woodine's second on Thriller. So it's interesting that you know that they were close, how it all cycles through. And you know, losing Eddie was pretty tough, you know, a couple months ago, but keep on going.
Small world. Tell me this. You know, obviously you got an array of work out there and Grammys to show for it. What are some projects that you're that even someone may not know? You know, someone sees that you mixed this record and said, "Oh, Alan Sykes did that," but what are you most proud of? Is there something that sticks out to you that
One of
you're
them
proud of?
particularly, because like at the Tech Awards this year, Joni Mitchell was being honored.
Yeah.
And when I did the Both Sides Now album with the London Symphony and, you know, all these great musicians, doing that record with Joni was probably one of the most exciting things I've ever done. You know, just in a musical, because she's great. First, I love her. But her voice at that period of time and the way this stuff came out was just, on A Case of You, there's a couple songs you're saying that the Both Sides, it's crazy. I mean, I just thought that was one of the best things I'd ever worked on. Of course, sometimes I like more eclectic stuff. I did a tune with Dr. John and Ricky Lee Jones that we did as a duet that was really funny. Making Whoop, you know, we did that in studio with a big band, the whole thing. That was really fun. But like, you know, I was very fond of Lynn Ronstadt. She's a lovely lady, and we did this song called "Somewhere Out There" for Steven Spielberg's, you know, show, and did all live. You know, and my buddy James Ingram, I actually talked him into coming in and singing on it because the first version was with Ruben Blades, and although Ruben's a great guy, you know, as a singer, you know, Linda's so nuts. James was the right guy because he could sing. It was a little bit lower key for a guy to deliver what he wanted to do, and so, you know, the part he sang and he just killed it. And so I just called him up, and says, "Get your ass over here. We got a good thing going on here," and that was a great song. And I was, you know, so many records I've worked on that I've had a good time on. And I love my buddy Ry Cooder, and I did this album called Little Village with Nick Lowe and Jim Keltner and Ry Cooder and John Hyde. I love that record. And the funny thing, that same group of musicians played on an album called Bring Home the Family, which was done in Studio 2. And then Bonnie Raitt ended up doing her album with all the same musicians and all the same songs. And it was album of the year, song of the year, thing. Same room, same thing, everything. And Eddie Journey recorded both of those things, you know. So that's, you know, was good for me because I had 18 studios. It's sort of like running a Four Seasons hotel, keeping everybody happy, you know, and on the up, you know, because, you know, even like, you know, sometimes you get great engineers and sometimes you get engineers that are not happening. And so I had really, really good second engineers. And our premise was to always try to keep things moving smoothly. And so, you know, sometimes you get people who are utterly incompetent, and the second is really doing the session. And that's fine as long as they're happy and they're comfortable. Because the other thing too is helping them in a way that does not feel like you're looking down on them. You're basically trying to help them without them knowing it. So everything sounds great, all moves smoothly. And that was the premise of Ocean Way, is that come on in, life's easy, let's make it work. Like my good friend Rob Cavallo, who did Green Day and you know, Dave Matthews stuff, is that a lot of times he'd be tracking and I'd come in and maybe I just get sounds for him. Maybe get help the drums. And I would go in and do that real quickly, or I get guitar sounds. And then he's happy, then I'll roll on. You know, I'm happy when they're happy. So, you know, if I had 18 sessions going on, I can only do one session at a time. But I was involved in a lot of sessions where I could help people get sounds, and it was fun. And always in a positive note, you know, never condescending or anything. It's just, well, you might just want to try this. You might have it fun. Or maybe I'd have the second put up an alternate set of mics or something else with some other cues, you know, just because they couldn't get a piano happening. And I said, well, no, Alan just threw this up. If you want to listen to it, it's on two faders. You just pull it up in A, B, see if you like it, you know, without being right.